My name is Scott Crecilius. I'm the worship leader here at Bridge Community Church. And I want to praise God because during this pandemic, there have been so many ways that God has been preparing us to do ministry during this pandemic. And so I always write a celebration team, worship team report at the beginning of the year. And so this year, it was like a story. I just needed to praise God for these certain things that I could see all along the way that He was preparing us for. So I wrote it down. The book of Esther says, "For such a time as this." And that refers to how God has put people in place. I can see God's hand in so many steps of the way. He was paving the way, setting the stage, preparing us for a time when we would all have to prepare and plan and worship apart. The March 15th, 2020 in-seat worship service was canceled because of precautions about COVID-19, but the next week we had a link for people to watch and connect again. March 22nd was our first online service with its humble beginnings, but we were online. Mike Primo was working hard to make this happen. Thus, the beginnings of Bridge Worship Online. Let me lay out some of the ways I've seen God preparing us the past few years. Several years ago, Pastor James encouraged us to implement our worship planning platform called Planning Center. As a worship leader, it honestly seemed like overkill. But I see clearly now it has been a tremendous necessity for such a time as this, to coordinate not only the people to serve, but also accessibility to the music we read and listen to for the worship team to rehearse and play. This turned out to be so crucial when coordinating things remotely during the pandemic. I have no doubt that Mike Primo was placed in our church with his IT gifts years ago to be used mightily, once again, for such a time as this. He has always had a passion for advancing our technology, and he kicked into high gear as we all began to scramble to get the church online. Those first couple months, he prepared, coordinated, and produced our services, all pre-recorded at that point from his basement during the beginnings of the pandemic. We formed a close team. We had coordination of endless chains of texts and emails between our initial team, and it became much more manageable as Mike had us join Slack, so we could have one platform to coordinate. Mark Raymond passionately got involved from that time forward with all the technology and has been such an asset ever since. In addition, Mike, myself, Margie Luan, Pastor Randy, and Mark Raymond have not stopped meeting together via Zoom weekly to plan our services. And we, of course, have added so many others to that team as we expand our possibilities. We have desired to have this kind of team for years, and I guess God used the pandemic in this way too. Stay tuned for more exciting developments as we continue to do things together. So, how do we get a worship team of musicians together to record during a pandemic? Well, you don't, right? But we did record ourselves in our own homes or quiet car, as in Kim Johnson's case. And thanks to Barry Brunke, who spent countless hours weekly, our recordings were mixed to sound almost like we were in the same room. Barry recorded bass or guitar in his studio. Mike either recorded drums or guitar in his basement. Scott was singing in his living room, Kim was singing in her car, Amy Luan in her house, John Eidsland on the flutes in his apartment, Sarah Luan on the pad keyboard in her bedroom, and eventually Joel Wicks and Chris Witt recording drums here in the empty church at night. Jay Johnson, Mary Crecilius, Amanda Crecilius, Nikita joined us when we all began recording back in the church. God not only placed Barry in our church for such a time as this, but also convinced him not to sell his recording equipment just weeks before the pandemic. Most of this year, our music team has been a little smaller because of the pandemic, but each one of these musicians felt all the more passionate about making music any way they could during these weeks and months when we could not get together in person. We all decided, no matter what, we were never going back to those early days of recording that way, and we always wanted to meet together in person. We've had exciting things like overhauling the balcony, seeing how God is going to be using new ways of reaching out to the community, the broader community as we seek Him. So things are different now, but they're exciting. Even though this pandemic was a surprise to us, God was preparing things all along the way. At first we were all scattered, but now we are all the more focused on His next adventure for all of us. He has something planned for all of us. And I can see more and more people getting involved little by little with their passions. And I know Tim and Jess Crucilius are really into that. And it's so exciting, you guys, how God is showing others what they can be doing. And there's something out there for you too. So make sure that you're listening to God's voice because He's going to use you. So praise God.